All right, we all love a good maritime mystery, right? But what if I told you the truth buried in the archives is actually way more wild than the ghost stories? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at myth versus muzzled reality in the Dutch East Indies archives. Let's get right into it. So, we're kicking things off with this absolutely chilling distress call. If you're into maritime lore, you probably know the legend of the Orang Medan. The story goes that nearby vessels picked up a frantic SOS out in the Pacific, and the radio operator tops out this horrifying message: "We float. All officers, including the captain, dead. Probably whole of crew dead." After a few incoherent dashes, the final transmission was simply, "I die." I mean, wow. It's literally the perfect hook for a nightmare scenario at sea, right? But here's the thing. When you actually trace this myth back to its roots, it doesn't even have a consistent starting line. Look at how this evolved. In the 1940 versions, the SOS supposedly comes from south of the Solomon Islands. Fast forward to 1947 or 48, and suddenly the story gets a major embellishment. The location shifts entirely to the Straits of Malacca, and they tag in a specific rescue ship, the American vessel Silver Star. You can literally see the myth evolving, adding dramatic little details with every single retelling. And the 1948 version of the legend, it is pure Hollywood. Supposedly, when the Silver Star boarded the Orang Medan, they walked into a total horror show. The crew was found flat on their backs, faces totally frozen in terror, just staring up at the sun with their mouths gaping open. Even the ship's dog was dead. But get this, no visible injuries on anyone. Zero. And then, super conveniently, before anyone can actually investigate, a fire just erupts in cargo hold number 4. The ship explodes, sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and takes absolutely all the physical evidence with it. How convenient, right? So this sets up a really stark contrast. On one hand, we've got the Orang Medan, this completely undocumented ghost ship that's been wildly sensationalized. On the other hand, we have the actual boots-on-the-ground maritime reality of the Dutch East Indies. And let me tell you, that reality was obsessively documented. The Dutch naval authorities, the Commandant Zeemacht, kept overwhelming, meticulous logs of literally every vessel movement, casualty, and cargo shipment. They tracked everything. The colonial bureaucracy was an absolute machine. Here, you'll find incredibly detailed logs of troop transports and passenger ships. They tracked the exact movements of specific vessels, like the MS Johan van Oldenbarneveld and the Sievejack. Actually, they recorded everything in ink, from leave regulations to exactly where military personnel were housed in Batavia. In a system like this, ships just do not vanish without leaving a massive paper trail. I mean, these authorities missed absolutely nothing. They actively documented illicit activities too. We can see intercepted smuggling operations from 1948. The Navy was meticulously tracking contraband. We're talking rubber, palm oil, even the confiscation of Republican propaganda. They were intercepting tiny sailing prows and cataloging the cargo down to smuggled nails and acetic acid from Singapore, literally nails. And even during the sheer total chaos of the Second World War, the archives tracked maritime tragedies with pinpoint precision. They documented the tragic loss of the HRMS De Ruyter in February 1942, right down to the declarations from survivors who were trying to reach the Java coast in lifeboats. They tracked missing personnel, prisoners of war, sunken ships. Real naval losses were deeply researched, verified, and safely filed away. Section 1. The Real Naval Mutiny. Suppression of the Zeeden Provinciën. So if they documented everything with such crazy precision, what happened when a real, actual crisis threatened their control? Well, let's look at the true timeline of a very real event. February 1933. Massive unrest sparks among the crew over severe naval pay cuts. The mutineers, a mix of Indonesian and European crew members, secure arms and literally take over the Dutch warship De Zeven Provinciën. And how does the colonial government respond to this? On February 10th, they have an airplane drop a bomb directly onto their own ship. It violently ended the mutiny right then and there. It's a stunning, heavily documented piece of history, which naturally brings up a pretty fascinating question. Why is this real, highly dramatic event, a government literally bombing its own mutinous warship, so much less known in popular culture than the fabricated myth of the Orang Medan? Seriously, why on earth do we remember a fake ghost ship but totally forget a real mutiny? Section 2. Censorship and Pressbordelt. Muzzling the press in the Indies. Well, the answer really comes down to how the government controlled the flow of information. The absolute key here is a concept called Pressbordel. This was a heavy-handed legal tool granted to the Governor General and executed by the Prosecutor General. Basically, it allowed the government to abruptly and temporarily suspend the printing, publishing, and distribution of any offending newspapers. If the state felt a publication was stepping out of line, bam, they could instantly muzzle it. And the triggers for this censorship were incredibly, dangerously broad. A paper didn't even have to break a specific law. If the state just felt it was endangering public order or tranquility, they could seize the printing presses and shut the whole premises down. It could be used for insulting public institutions, worsening interracial relations, or stirring up labor unrest and anti-government campaigns. Essentially, it was a massive dragnet designed to keep an iron grip on the narrative whenever tensions got high. And oh, they definitely used it. When we look at secret colonial documents from that era, we can verify at least 37 instances of this extreme press muzzling enacted by the state. This wasn't some rare one-off thing. It was a core systemic strategy of information control. In fact, papers like Het Nationaal Uitkludblad and De Heraut got hit with persbredel specifically because they dared to report on the Zeven Provinciën mutiny. The authorities were terrified. They thought widespread reporting on the warship takeover would trigger massive labor strikes all across the Indies. So, to contain the perceived threat, the government just actively silenced the true story. Section 3. Documenting a colonial empire. The bureaucratic reality. Beyond just censorship, the sheer scale of their information gathering was, frankly, mind-boggling. Daily maritime operations were drowning in red tape. Look at these files showing the strict regulation of sea havens in 1948, the shipping statistics spanning the whole archipelago, and the super strict maritime regimes. I mean, not a single vessel moved through these waters without generating an absolute mountain of official paperwork. This bureaucratic state left behind vast archives that tracked literally everything you can imagine. The scope is just wild. They recorded incredibly detailed ethnological and linguistic studies of indigenous populations in New Guinea. They tracked urbanization, migration patterns, even agricultural data like the cultivation of cacao and sago. Militarily, they monitored radio broadcasts, secured secret code usage, and cataloged every tiny instance of ship damage and wreckage. Think about it. When a government is tracking the cultivation of sago and secret naval codes, they do not just lose a ship like the Orang Medan. Section 4. Myth, Muzzling, and Memory. How we remember history. So we're left with this really profound juxtaposition. On one side, we have the legend everyone knows, the Orang Medan. It's a thrilling, spooky story that gets shared endlessly, yet it's entirely unverified by this massive colonial bureaucracy. On the flip side, we have the history that was intentionally hidden, the Zeven Provinciën mutiny, meticulously documented by the state, violently resolved, and yet actively scrubbed from public consciousness to maintain order. It just goes to show you, the stories that capture our imagination are so often fictions, while the true, intense historical dramas were purposefully locked away. Which leaves us with a final thought to close out this explainer. When human nature eagerly creates these thrilling myths, and governments tightly muzzle the narrative of real events, how much of what we collectively remember is actually the truth? And maybe more importantly, what other true, astonishing stories have been lost to the archives? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning the stories you hear, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.